I'm 50 now. Life's been predictable, if not comfortable, for a long time. My wife, Karen, is 48, and we've been together for 23 years. Our son, Jake, turned 19 last month and left for college a year ago. That empty nest feeling hit us hard at first, but we adjusted. Or at least I thought we did. Lately, things between Karen and me haven't felt quite right. There's a distance growing between us, subtle but there. She's been more preoccupied, more guarded. I tell myself it's nothing, just the usual stuff people deal with after their kids are out of the house. It started small. Karen joined a new gym, which seemed great at first. We joked about staying in shape now that we were middle-aged. But she started going more often, a lot more, and her phone was suddenly glued to her hand, her screen always facing away from me. I try not to read too much into it. But then, she got secretive, late-night texts, quick glances at her phone during dinner, and suddenly not sharing much about her day. I could feel it creeping in, that nagging sense that something was off, but I kept pushing it aside. I wanted to believe that this was just some phase, a midlife crisis or something. After all, we've been through a lot over the years. The arguments, the makeups, raising Jake. Nothing we couldn't handle, right? One evening, I'm on the couch watching an old basketball game, trying to unwind, when my phone buzzes. I glance down and see it's Rick, an old buddy from work. We haven't hung out much since he left the company a few years ago, but he was always good for a beer and a laugh. "Hey man, how about we grab a drink this week?" His text reads. I don't think much of it. Rick's always been the type to pop in and out of your life when you least expect it. I shoot back a quick reply, agreeing to meet him at the local bar on Friday. Little do I know, Rick's message isn't just a casual invite. It's the beginning of something I never could have imagined. Friday night rolls around. Karen and I head out to meet Rick and his wife, Stacy, at our usual spot, a cozy bar we've all been to countless times. It's the first time in a while we've gone out as a group, so I'm looking forward to catching up. Rick's always good for a laugh, and Karen seems in a better mood tonight. Maybe this will be a good reset for both of us. When we arrive, Rick and Stacy are already there along with another couple, Mike and Jenna, who I've met a few times before. They're friendly, down-to-earth people, so the night starts off on a good note. We grab a large table in the back, order some drinks, and the conversations start flowing. Rick's telling one of his classic stories about the time he got stuck in an elevator at work, which is everyone in stitches. Karen's laughing along, looking relaxed for the first time in weeks. It feels like old times, like maybe things aren't as off between us as I thought. The drinks keep coming, and the stories get more interesting. We start trading funny memories, weird travel experiences, and Karen even jumps in with a story about that disaster of a family road trip we took a few years back when Jake was still in high school. Everyone's comfortable, at ease. At some point, after a couple more rounds, the conversation takes a shift. Mike, a little buzzed, throws out a hypothetical question, something about relationships and trust. So, what do you all think about cheating? I mean, not just the obvious stuff, but why do people do it? Mike asks, swirling his beer. The table goes quiet for a beat. It's one of those questions that lands like a grenade in a social setting. Rick's the first to speak up. Cheating? Nah, man, it's messed up. No matter how you slice it, someone's gonna get hurt. Ain't no good reason for it. Stacy nods in agreement, and Karen chimes in. It's a betrayal, plain and simple. If something's wrong in a relationship, you talk about it. You don't go sneaking around. Everyone else around the table murmurs their agreement, echoing the same sentiment. Cheating is wrong, destructive. There's no gray area about it. Then Jenna, who's been quiet for most of the conversation, suddenly speaks up with a different take. Well, I mean, it's not always black and white, is it? Sometimes people cheat because they're missing something. It's not always about betrayal. It can be more complicated than that. Mike, sitting next to her, nods, his arm draped casually over her shoulder. Yeah, it's not like cheating's always some evil thing. Sometimes it can even help a relationship, you know? Shake things up, make people appreciate what they've got. Rick raises an eyebrow. Wait, are you two saying cheating is good? Jenna shrugs, a half smile on her face. Not good, exactly, but it can have its benefits if it's handled the right way. After a few hours at the bar, the group was buzzing, both from the drinks and the heated conversation. The topic of cheating had left a weird tension hanging in the air, but everyone brushed it off as the night carried on. At some point, Stacy checked her phone and realized she had to get back home to their kids. She gave Rick a quick kiss, told us all to have a good night, and headed out. leaving the rest of us to figure out the next move. Rick, always the life of the party, suggested we continue the night at our place. Let's keep this going. We got plenty of booze, right? He said, nudging me with his elbow. I was buzzed enough to agree without much thought, so Karen and I led the way back to our house, with Rick, Mike, and Jenna following close behind. Once we got there, we all settled into the living room. Karen opened a fresh bottle of wine, while Rick rummaged through the liquor cabinet for something stronger. The mood was light again, the awkwardness from earlier pushed aside as we fell back into telling jokes, swapping funny stories, and just letting loose. At some point, I must have lost track of how much I'd been drinking because things started to blur. I remember laughing at one of Rick's stories, something about a wild night during a business trip, and then leaning back on the couch, feeling the weight of the alcohol pull me down. Karen was sitting across from me, talking with Jen about some trip she wanted to take next year. Rick and Mike were arguing about who made the best old-fashioned, and the music was playing softly in the background. It all felt like one of those nights where the world spins a little slower, like you're floating just above reality. But then, exhaustion hit me like a ton of bricks. The drinks, the late hour, everything combined, and I could barely keep my eyes open. I'm gonna crash. I slurred, pushing myself up from the couch. Karen looked at me, raising an eyebrow, but didn't stop me. Go ahead, you lightweight, she teased with a smile. I stumbled my way to the bedroom, my body heavy with booze. As I collapsed onto the bed, the voices from the living room faded into the background. I barely registered the laughter, the soft murmurs of conversation, or the fact that Karen hadn't followed me. It didn't take long for me to drift off into a deep, alcohol-fueled sleep. I woke up the next morning with my head pounding like a drum. The hangover hit me hard, and I could barely piece together how the night had ended. The last thing I remembered was staggering off to bed, leaving Karen, Rick, Mike, and Jenna to continue the party. Rubbing my temples, I dragged myself out of bed and stumbled into the kitchen, where Karen was already sitting with a cup of coffee, looking just as rough as I felt. Morning, I groaned, pouring myself a cup of coffee and joining her at the table. She looked up from her mug, her eyes a bit bloodshot. Morning, she muttered back, clearly not in the mood for much conversation. I took a long sip of the coffee, hoping it would help bring me back to life. So, how'd the night end? I kind of bailed on you guys, I asked, trying to piece together what I'd missed after I crashed. Karen shifted in her seat, her expression tightening. Nothing much. We just talked for a while, and then everyone left. Nothing exciting, she mumbled, staring down at her coffee like it held the answer to her sudden discomfort. I squinted at her, feeling a little fuzzy from the hangover, but not totally missing how she brushed off the question. Right, I said, not really pushing it. I was too tired and hungover to care much at the moment. I figured she was just cranky from the night of drinking and went back to sipping my coffee. Karen quickly stood up and headed toward the door. I'm gonna go shower, she said over her shoulder, practically bolting from the kitchen before I could ask anything else. It was weird how tense she seemed, but I chalked it up to the hangover and maybe some annoyance from my bailing on the group last night. It wouldn't be the first time she got moody over something small. I finished my coffee and checked the time. It was already past noon, and I realized I hadn't even seen Jake since he got back from college. He'd come home the night before, probably while I was already passed out. Jake was my son from my first marriage, and while things weren't bad between him and Karen, they weren't exactly warm either. He'd always been a bit distant with her, which made sense. He was already a teenager when Karen and I got together. He respected her, sure, but there was always a bit of tension, especially now that he was older and more independent. Just then, I heard movement from the hallway. Jake stepped into the kitchen, looking freshly showered and wearing his usual serious expression. Hey, kid, I greeted him, trying to sound more awake than I actually felt. Didn't hear you coming last night. He shrugged, grabbing some cereal from the cupboard. Yeah, you were already knocked out when I got back, he said, pouring himself a bowl. He didn't seem particularly interested in making small talk, which wasn't unusual. We sat there in relative silence, me nursing my coffee and him eating his cereal. Karen's odd behavior from earlier drifted to the back of my mind. I figured it was just a hangover or maybe the fact that Jake was home for the weekend, which always made things a bit tense between them. Still, it was good to have him back, even if things felt slightly off in the house this morning. As the day wore on, things seemed to settle into a normal rhythm. Karen stayed mostly to herself, and I assumed she was just recovering from the hangover, same as me. Jake and I spent the afternoon catching up a bit, talking about his classes and how college life was treating him. I could tell something was on his mind, though. He seemed more distracted than usual, his eyes darting around like he was wrestling with something he couldn't quite spit out. By late afternoon, we were sitting in the living room. I was watching some TV, but Jake kept fidgeting like he was working up the nerve to say something. Finally, he turned to me, his face serious. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," he started, his voice low. "Something I saw last night." I muted the TV and turned to face him. The look on his face set off alarms in my head instantly. "What's up?" I asked, already feeling a knot forming in my gut. Jake hesitated, taking a deep breath before he spoke. I didn't know how to say this, and I wasn't sure if I should, but last night when I got home, I saw Karen. She was kissing Rick. My heart stopped. I just stared at him, not really processing what he was saying. "Kissing Rick?" I repeated, my voice slow, like I was trying to make sure I heard him right. Jake nodded, his expression tense. "Yeah." I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to believe it, but I saw it with my own eyes, Dad. They were in the living room. Rick and Karen they weren't the only ones. Mike and Jenna were there too. They were kissing each other. I felt like the room was spinning. My brain was struggling to catch up with what Jake was telling me. "Wait, so Karen and Rick and Mike and Jenna? What the hell are you saying, Jake?" I asked, my voice cracking as the weight of his words started to sink in. Jake looked down, avoiding my eyes. "It wasn't just kissing, Dad. I heard things after. Sounds from the bedroom." He swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to believe it, but I think something more happened after you went to bed. I thought maybe I was wrong, but after hearing them, I had to tell you, it didn't feel right keeping it to myself. My heart was pounding in my chest, the blood roaring in my ears. I sat there, completely frozen, unable to speak. There was no way this was real. Karen? With Rick? And the others too? The room suddenly felt too small, like I couldn't breathe. Jake looked at me, his face filled with guilt. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't want to upset you, but I couldn't keep it from you. I know it's messed up. I just thought you should know." For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind was racing, replaying everything from last night. The drinks, the awkward moments, Karen's nervous reaction this morning when I asked about how the night ended. It all started to add up in a way I hadn't wanted to see before. The uneasy feeling I'd had when I woke up, Karen brushing off my questions, it was all clicking into place now, and I felt sick to my stomach. Still reeling from what Jake had just told me, I couldn't sit still. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone and scrolled to Rick's number. I had to hear from him directly. Maybe Jake had misunderstood something. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The pit in my stomach told me this wasn't a misunderstanding. I dialed Rick's number, and after a few rings, someone picked up. It wasn't Rick. It was Stacy, his wife. Her voice hit me like a slap. She was crying, her voice shaking. How could you let this happen?" she sobbed, barely getting the words out between gasps for breath. "Stacy," I stammered, confused. "What are you talking about? What happened?" "I'm calling to talk to Rick." "You don't get to talk to him, you bastard," she spat, her words dripping with venom. You and Karen. You ruined everything. How could you do this to me? I trusted you. I trusted both of you." I sat there in stunned silence, my phone pressed to my ear, my mind spinning. "Stacy, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything," I said, my voice rising in desperation. Her sobs grew louder, her words choked with anger. "Don't you dare act like you don't know. Rick came home last night and told me everything. About Karen, about how they've been sneaking around. You all." She broke off into another fit of crying, and I could barely make out the next part. "And you were right there, letting it happen." Wait, what? Letting what happen?" I stammered, my head spinning even more. "I didn't know anything, Stacy. I didn't." "You didn't know?" she shouted, cutting me off. "You were there. You were in the house while all of them were together, and you didn't even stop it. What the hell kind of husband are you?" I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. Her words hit me like a freight train. She thought I knew? That I'd somehow been okay with all of this? "Stacy, listen to me," I said, trying to stay calm despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "I didn't know anything about this. I swear. I went to bed early. I didn't see anything." "Don't lie to me," she snapped, her voice sharp. "Rick told me the truth, and I don't care what excuses you come up with. You're just as guilty as they are. You let it happen under your roof. I felt like I was sinking. The weight of her words crashed over me, and suddenly, everything Jake had said made sense. Rick must have confessed to Stacy, and now she thought I was part of whatever had gone down between Karen and him. Stacy, please, I tried again, my voice weak. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I'm just finding out about all of this now. But she wasn't listening. You're disgusting, she hissed before slamming the phone down, leaving me in a suffocating silence, my head spinning with confusion and shock. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, numb from Stacy's accusations. My head was spinning, and I hadn't even begun to process what she had said. Then I heard footsteps. Karen walked into the room. She looked stressed, like she'd been holding something in for far too long. She glanced at me, her face tight, her eyes darting around nervously. What's going on? I asked, my voice strained. What happened last night? Karen stopped, her hand trembling slightly as she rubbed her temple. She was avoiding my eyes. We were drunk, okay? She began, her voice shaky. Things got out of hand. I felt my stomach drop. The weight of what Jake had told me, what Stacy had yelled through the phone, suddenly crushed me. Out of hand? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. What the hell does that mean? She swallowed hard, taking a deep breath before she continued. Mike and Jenna, they were talking about cheating. You know, how they brought it up at the bar, joking about how exciting it can be after years of being married. Well, when we got back here, they didn't stop. They kept talking about it, about how good it feels to experience something new, to try something different. Her voice faltered, and she finally met my eyes, her face pale. I didn't say anything, waiting for her to keep going, though I already felt like I knew where this was headed. Karen sighed, her voice barely above a whisper now. Then, Mike and Jenna started kissing, right in front of us. It was intense, like they didn't care that we were sitting there. They just looked at us while they were doing it. It was seductive. I felt my jaw tighten as she spoke, every word hitting me like a punch in the gut. And they looked at Rick and me, like they were inviting us in. Karen continued, her voice trembling. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was something else, but Rick kissed me. It just happened. I didn't stop him. I could feel the blood rushing to my head, my heart pounding in my ears. I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my anger in check. And then what? I demanded, though I knew the answer before she even said it. Karen's face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. After that, everything just happened. All of us, Mike, Jenna, Rick, and me, we slept together. She broke off, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I thought would happen, but it did. I stood there, staring at her, my mind reeling, trying to process what she was saying. My wife, the woman I had been with for over 2 decades, had just admitted to cheating on me with our closest friends in the most humiliating way imaginable. You all just did it? Like it was nothing? And didn't call me? I asked, but it was a bad joke. Karen sobbed, wiping at her face. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean for this to happen. It's not like I wanted it. It just, I don't know. I got caught up in the moment. I dialed Rick's number again. The phone rang a few times before Rick finally picked up. Hey man, he started, his voice unusually casual, like he wasn't fully aware of the hellstorm that had just exploded around us. Rick, I said, my voice ice cold, barely containing the fury bubbling up in my chest. I just talked to Karen. She told me everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long, uncomfortable silence before he finally responded. Listen, I didn't mean for any of that to happen. It wasn't my fault, okay? We were all drunk, and Mike and Jenna started it. Karen, she didn't stop it either. I mean, come on, man, it's not like I was the only one involved. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. So this is their fault? Mike and Jenna? Karen? You're seriously going to blame everyone but yourself? Rick stammered, clearly flustered. I'm not saying that, but you know how things got out of control. They were all in on it. Everyone was a part of this. I felt my blood boiling as he tried to dodge the blame. So, that's your excuse? Everyone was doing it? I snapped. You were my friend, Rick. My best friend. And you kissed my wife, slept with her, and now you're trying to weasel out of it by pointing the finger at everyone else? Stacy thinks I'm a part of this because of you. You lied to her, didn't you? Rick's voice faltered. I didn't tell her everything. I told her enough to look, it was just a one-time thing. I swear, you can't blame me for everything. I don't care what you told Stacy. I growled, my anger finally spilling over. You wrecked everything. You and Karen, Mike, Jenna, fine, they played their part. But you kissed my wife, Rick, in my house. While I was in the other room. You didn't just cross a line, you burned it to the ground. Rick tried to interject, but I wasn't done. You're a coward. You're standing there blaming everyone else like it just happened, like you weren't in control. That's what makes this even worse. You're not even man enough to admit what you did. The silence on the other end told me he had nothing left to say, but I wasn't going to wait for an apology. You're not my friend anymore, Rick. Don't call me, don't come near me, and don't expect me to ever forgive you for this. After hanging up on Rick, I stood there for a moment, the house quiet around me. I needed a way out of this mess. I walked to the garage, figuring I'd go for a drive to clear my head. As I reached for my keys, I noticed something odd, a small, forgotten box shoved behind some old paint cans. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were papers I hadn't seen in years, documents from a business venture I'd invested in over a decade ago. I flipped through them, barely remembering the details. But one sheet caught my eye. It was a notice from a company in Texas, congratulating me on a successful oil investment. I froze. I'd completely forgotten about this, an old gamble I made before meeting Karen, back when I was still trying to build my life. I glanced at the date. The company had been trying to contact me for months. The payout was substantial, life-changing even. I tossed the papers back in the box, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. Karen could keep the house. She and Rick, Mike, Jenna, whatever they had going on, it was their problem now. I had something better waiting. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.